problem there.
It's always that.
Hey.
Oh, that's working too. Okay. I expect quite some lively discussion from the people.
Yep. Yeah, before I read things closely. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. We have 5 items on the agenda. The ones that are starred require action on the part of the City Council. The other 2 may be acted on by the Planning Commission tonight. And to start with, Maria is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance after Commissioner Smith offers a prayer.
Our kind and gracious Father in heaven, we come before thee this day, and we are thankful for the opportunity that we have to serve in this wonderful city. We're thankful for those who serve and work the city. We ask for a blessing on them and safety. And we're thankful for the wonderful citizens who volunteer so much and who give of their time to feedback in the process of making a great place to live in Provo. We ask that we might be civil tonight and that we might get the things done that would be of the best use for the entire city of Provo. And we ask for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Would the audience please rise?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Commissioner, starting with Commissioner Smith, let's do the roll call.
Brian Smith, I have no conflicts tonight.
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Andrew Howard, no conflicts.
Maria Winden, no conflicts.
Thank you very much. So the first item, a proposal to amend the general plan from mixed use to industrial for a site that's located on 1400 South State Street. I'll turn it over to Mr. Corey to present.
All right, thank you. The item that's before you, as you read in, is a general plan amendment. One thing to note with general plan amendments, or with the general plan, is that there's really 2 parts to a general plan. There's a map and there's text. They all go together and they speak to each other. But it's important to address and understand a lot of times the map might not be as descriptive as text might be. So what you have before you is an image of the current general plan map on the left. That orange color is what's called mixed use. And there's some description in the text of what that mixed use is intended to be. On the right is the current zone map. You can see it's currently zoned R110. The zoning to R110 occurred fairly recently. It was back in September of 2017. Now, the general plan since about 1997, 1998 has shown commercial for that area. In 2010 was when the update occurred that changed this to mixed use and gave more description to what was intended in the area. However, since that time, the zoning had remained industrial for quite a long time, M1 light industrial. So although the general plan reflected this desire to move away, the zoning that actually gave some or permitted a number of uses to continue there and new uses actually even being constructed still remained. As far as the text, here's just a couple excerpts from the current general plan that talk about the South State Street corridor and the area, primarily focusing on that mixed use, looking for something of higher architectural standard and a focus on meeting some residential needs. So then in 2017, early 2017, the the Southeast area plan was completed. Many of you were on the Planning Commission when that first came through, and so you probably recall seeing that. This is the map from that plan, which further supports the general plan and then offers some more refinement to what that vision might entail. It supported the idea of residential uses, even suggesting medium density residential and a batching overlay to support a unique demographic need that's down in that area. And those are some of the written policies that are in that Southeast area plan. So the reason I mention these is, and I mentioned the zoning still remaining on the previous, the Southeast plan, as that was going through, there were new industrial uses being proposed and being permitted at that time. So as one of the first initiatives after the adoption of that plan was when the zone change was initiated for residential. And again, many of you were on the Planning Commission as that zone change came through, so you're probably familiar with the background involved there. But as you can see, the general plan suggesting commercial and then even suggesting mixed use for about 20 years wasn't necessarily prohibiting or encouraging the right types of uses to occur there. The city definitely felt a need to zone the area to remove those industrial entitlements that were permitting those uses to go in. The idea was by zoning it as R110, it would stop the further encroachment of industrial uses and help encourage the right types of uses that actually do fit within the plan to start coming through. So that being said, hopefully that gives you enough background on the area and why it exists today. The applicant's request is to return the general plan, at least for the subject property, to industrial. In the CRC review, the staff did note a handful of concerns. Primarily, there wasn't really enough information about what was actually intended to go there, how any type of intended development might be compatible, or even there were no statements from the applicant as to why this planning process that was then reinforced again in 2017 is no longer applicable to the area or not appropriate for the area. So there was just simply nothing presented for staff to provide for an analysis for you on that. So we've raised those concerns and have not seen an answer come back on that. I do know the applicant's here, so perhaps he can provide some insight for you today. The rest, the only other major thing to point out is Provo City Code 14.02.020, and this is in your staff report. Every general plan that comes through, staff provides an analysis for you of how we feel that it meets or does not meet the requirements for a general plan amendment. There are 3 or 4 of those items where staff does not believe that this proposed amendment encourages and promotes the intent of the general plan, and we don't see a reason to amend it. With that, we recommend that you forward a recommendation for denial to the municipal council. Any questions?
Any questions for staff?
Do you know when the general plan is going to be amended or considered for this new plan as outlined by the council?
The Southeast Area Plan was adopted in early 2017, so it's been
So it's, okay.
yeah, that's all adopted. What's before you right now is the applicant's requesting now to change that.
Is the applicant here tonight? Please, come on up. Tell us about your request.
I am the applicant. Thank you for your time tonight. And well done, Austin, on explaining the
Can you state your name, please?
Steve Turley, thank you, representing Premier Realty Investments. Can I have the map of the site? Is this pointer thing going to work? Does it work? There we go. I own this business right here. Oh, I'm sorry. I am a part owner of this building that sits right there. It's on State Street. It's commonly known as the Zion Upholstery Building. It's been there for like 300 years. This area right here, outlined in red, is the Pro Steel property, the property that's currently owned and where by Pro Steel, and they operate their business out of there. And they've been a great business. It's been in this community for half a decade, I think. They talk about half a decade and more. This area here is not part of the purchase. This area here that includes all the developed industrial buildings. And I don't know, maybe there's a technical reason, Austin, about why my application was for the 8 acres and then this was, all 14 was noticed up. And I'm not trying to split any hairs there, but just so you'll know, my purchase is for this vacant area that lies behind all the buildings and then lies up next to the building that I currently own there. And while I'm not trying to split a hair there. This area is not part of the request that I am making, and while they do continue they do intend to continue the use that they have now, and they're grandfathered in, and I wish them well and hope they run a successful business for as long as they want to. Our interest is in, and our contract is for the vacant portions there. And as a general plan is general, and sometimes it gets really specific. So then I guess is my request. It's a general request, asking for clarity from not only the Planning Commission but the Council about the city's intent and hopes for this general area and then specifically this vacant portion here. So while we operate light industrial out of there, we have a warehouse and we have a retail use on the north side. The south side has been compliant with that light industrial for many, many decades. And so our original request of these neighbors to buy part of their property here was to expand this. And so keeping those options open of a construction yard, of the light industrial uses that we are currently involved with. If that's not the city's hope for, we get it. We thought we would ask the question and get clarity from you decision makers. So if there's any questions for me, I'm happy to do it. But I apologize if Mr. Corey thought that perhaps my non-response or my lack of specificity was that I was withholding something. It was not that. It was that we don't know. So we were just asking the question about if this generally could be considered for light industrial uses.
Thank you. Any questions, I guess, for the applicant maybe before we move on, the commission?
Thank you.
Okay, great. Is there a neighborhood chair here with us tonight for the?
Mary Miller, Spring Creek Neighborhood Chair. Since we're not talking about changing a zone tonight, and we're only addressing the amendment to the general plan, I was wondering if I could ask a question quickly of you. Would you put up the final one down in the corner? It has some projections. Would you tell us about those projections? It's on a map right there. Could you speak to that?
So during the Southeast area planning, when discussing this area, a large part of it, there's currently a already zoned commercial piece at this corner. Many of you might know it as the old Pioneer Drive-In site. That's been zoned commercial for quite some time, and a lot of the idea in meeting some of the housing needs is also to offer enough rooftops to encourage the the existing zoned commercial sites to actually develop that way. So those projections were provided to identify what type of additional housing units would support that type of a use.
So those are real residences that
They're
could
projections.
be. That's what I'm saying. It's a projection. And that's basically what the general plan is too. It's a projection. It's a place, it's all set out. It's where we need to go. The main reason that we, with the council's urging as well, so much of this area had been developing with things that don't fit the general plan as far as the future is concerned. With the projection for population increases and everything, we've got to find a place to build appropriate housing units that are affordable, and that's the big thing, affordable housing units. So the reason that it was zoned originally, I know we're not talking about zone tonight, but I want you to know that that obviously plays a factor in why this application for the general plan amendment has been made. The reason that we went that route was because it places greater scrutiny on what is being developed in that area. We had, before Bear River Storage went in, 5 storage units within a mile of each other. And there was nothing we could do to say no to Bear River. And quite frankly, we are thrilled with their unit. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a great asset to our neighborhood. There's no problems there. But realizing that that came in and that our hands were tied and we could not say no to anything else like that that was coming in, understanding the projection for population growth and affordable housing, we just felt like we needed to have something in place. And I don't know if I see a few familiar faces who were there at the time that this was changed. And the whole point of it, we came asking for LDR. And, our thought was we need to have some say. And then someone else recommended MDR. And then the question was put to, I believe, Mr. Jones, the attorney. I'm not actually sure on that. Or it may have been Mr. Pepperoni. The purpose for this, and he clearly states, let me just review this. Oh, when it was in front of the council, and I know you're not the council, I know you're planning commission, but this is vital information. One of the council members asked Bill Pepperoni why we were asking for this R110 now that you had approved it. And he said the bottom line is the value of the R110 zoning allows an extra layer of scrutiny to ensure the right product is being developed. And that goes to what's coming in the future and affordable housing for those who are out there. And there are some great projects that are happening right now, not all of them that you have seen. But I just want to say that as a neighborhood at our meeting, the only verbal comment that was made concerning this amendment to the general plan was to leave it as it is, and that came from John Amadio. As a private citizen, I am asking you to leave it as it is because someone needs to be concerned about where we're going to put all these people who are coming. It is going to happen. So with that being said, my hope is that you would make your decision aligned with the staff report that's been supplied for you. Okay? Oh, one other thing to note as well. At the neighborhood meeting, we did ask several times why we would do this. What do you want to put there? And I don't know, he says. So we don't know. And if we don't know, we are being fools to move forward with something that we have no idea where it's going to take us. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other neighborhood chairs here that would like to speak to this item tonight? No? Okay. Yeah, we kind of already talked to the applicant a little bit, let's say. Is there anybody else here that would like to speak to this item tonight?
My name's Ken Miller, and to be full disclosure, I'm Mary's husband, neighborhood chairman. And I often have to keep my mouth shut because I'm, in the in crowd, so. But I'd like to address a more larger issue here. Not the intended usage, not what's really going on now, the specific application, but the fact that we went through this process of a general plan, which the state requires, with a southeast area plan the council requested, and now within about a year, we're throwing this out. I find it's not practical to suddenly turn the ship around that quick. I think these long-term plans need some long-term consideration. And a short-term change better have a real good reason. That's all I got to say for that.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak? The first item? Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing then for the first item. Commissioners, have any additional discussion, questions for the applicant, questions for staff?
I would just like a question for the staff. He wants a change to industrial. There are other areas in the city with a zone industrial, I take it, south Provo.
Yeah, actually just directly west of the railroad tracks there. So the border of this red line is the border of the Spring Creek neighborhood. This gray color that you see to the west of there, that's all industrial over in the East Bay area.
All right, thank you.
I guess I should note that's just the only area that's currently shown on a map in front of you. There's plenty of other industrial areas in the city, yeah.
In light of the public comments, Mr. Turley, do you have anything to add or? Okay, thank you. So once again, any other discussion on part of the commission? And just to be clear, I understand that we don't have like any kind of a specific concept plan or anything like that for what the property might be used for. It's just
Correct.
simply-
We don't have any further information other than a request to move to industrial.
Okay.
In the staff report, the applicant's written request is attachment number 1. That's the information that's been presented to staff.
Okay. So maybe not even entirely related just to this proposal, but to the concept of the overall plan for the area and the area that is designated MDR. Has there been much discussion about residential development in this area since we haven't seen anything get to us yet, but
Yeah, we actually have 2 active applications right now that you'll see quite soon, and there's been talk in 2 other areas. 2 other areas or 1 other area?
We have 3 active applications, right? We
So-
have 2 on 1320 South, and then we have the one between the storage units, right?
Yeah, correction, we have 3 active applications. But anyway, the short of that is yes, we've seen interest and there's applicants fully pursuing this option.
the zoning that they would anticipate having for their projects is,
The other applications are basically requesting to match what's currently in the general plan. So there are some, one of the applications in that LDR area, they're asking for LDR. The others are in the MDR and they're asking for MDR.
the current zoning wouldn't really allow for a lot, right? The R110, that residential, pretty low density.
Right, nobody's pursuing that.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, if there's no other discussion,
I don't have anything to discuss. I think the plan's been established, and I think it would be a mistake to change course. I think we should stick with the council's recommendation right now.
that a motion?
It is. I move that we deny the applicant a zone change in item 1 to change the zone from mixed use, general plan amendment from mixed use to industrial for 14.17 acres located at 14 South State, Spring Creek neighborhood, on the basis of general plan has been established and the direction of the neighborhood is changing in that direction.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Item number 2 is a proposed text amendment to clarify the neighborhood meeting requirements for general plan amendments. Is it Mr. Yost, you're presenting this one? Okay, so we'll turn the time over to Mr. Yost.
The council executive director has come to community development with a request to amend portions of our city code to clarify and reinforce the noticing and meeting requirements for the process of land use applications going through the neighborhood meeting process. They have drafted the proposed amendments to address concerns, those noticing requirements. Essentially, there's 2 portions of the code that are within your purview that are proposed to be amended. The first is in 14.02.010 that specifies planning commissions should not be held until the following conditions are met, and there are 4 proposed. They're both reinforce what is existing policy or practice or in the code and then clarify. So A is that 45 days have passed from the sending of a notice to the neighborhood chair. When we get a land use application, the neighborhood chair of the areas receives a notice. B, a neighborhood meeting has been held on the issue. C, the meeting has been waived, or 20 days have passed since the applicant has requested final action in writing pursuant to applicable Utah code, often called the writ court provision. So it specifies that those criteria need to be met before a planning commission hearing is held. And 15.17.040 deals specifically with the requirements preceding planning commission and council action on a general plan amendment. So this allows the planning commission and the council to consider general plan amendments if a neighborhood meeting hasn't been held, if the following criteria are met. And these 3 are, first, that 45 days have passed since the sending of that notice to the neighborhood chair. B, a neighborhood meeting has been waived, or 20 days have passed since the applicant's requested final action. We have the red line sections of the code as well, if you have any questions. Staff has not does not have any concerns with these changes. They are essentially in line with the policy and practice that has been conducted so far, has been done up to this point. And we recommend that you forward a positive recommendation to the municipal council to adopt these proposed text amendments.
Mr. Yost, thank you. Do we have any questions for staff?
Yeah, obviously you see this as a clarification of policies and procedures for both the applicant and the city to make things a more smoother process. That's why it's being proposed.
Yes. Any other questions for staff? I have one that may be entirely off topic. The development approval process review, was that a limited time kind of a committee, or is that an ongoing body that?
So that is an ad hoc committee created by the council to review the development review process and to determine ways that we could improve that, both for applicants, for efficiency in our city process, and for transparency and ease of procedure for the neighborhoods.
Okay. Has that committee completed its work? Is it still?
I believe that committee is still
It's ongoing.
ongoing, yes.
Okay.
Well, you might say never ending.
Okay. Thank you. Again, thank you, staff. Is there anyone here from the public tonight that would like to speak this item?
We have the applicant is here,
The applicant representing the city. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Karen Tapahi. I work in the council office. Cliff Strachan, our executive director, is on vacation, so he asked me to step in. I'm coordinator of the neighborhood program, so it's kind of my area. This came out of a lot of requests from neighborhood chairs who were finding some of the wording a little confusing, especially the original wording that said that you had to hold a neighborhood meeting within 45 days, but 21 days from the planning commission meeting that hadn't even been scheduled yet. So that had everybody really confused. And then the neighborhoods do get a lot of pressure. As soon as a development application goes in, the developer wants to, move the process along quickly. And we just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And several of our council members have been neighborhood chairs or vice chairs before and have kind of felt the heat and know what it's like. So we wanted to make sure it was super clear, which is sometimes hard to achieve in our city code, but this was our attempt to really put some good steps to the process. Plus, we hadn't really accounted before for that ripcord provision, something I'm definitely not familiar with, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with. But I don't know if you have any questions on the neighborhood side of things.
Have any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this tonight?
My name's Sharon Mehmet. I'm a vice chair in some of the neighborhoods, and I'd appreciate if you would amend this to add in the noticing part to include vice chairs. I know we've had the time, and so this just kind of gets bypassed completely. If I don't hear about it, then I can't act on it. And also there are occasion that possibly vice chair and chair don't agree. And so maybe the chair's not holding that meeting because they want this to move forward, and the vice chair didn't even know that was happening, unless I'm actually going through every email I get from the city. Oh my goodness. But that would be appreciated. And also possibly, and I don't know how to do it other than the emails, but citywide things don't get noticed quite as well. And sometimes they're kind of bigger issues even than the little ones. So.
Thank you.
Hi, Martha Rasmussen. I'm a Mazer vice chair, and I would second that vice chair thing, by the way. I just had a question. As we're clearing up the language, there was one piece that was still not clear to me, that 20-day notice or final notice thing, whatever. I don't understand how that works, and I'm a little concerned because I don't understand it, so maybe it's a groundless concern. I'm a little concerned that there's some way to use that to circumvent the rest of the neighborhood process. So if you could explain to me how that 20-day thing works, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here for this item? Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Commission, do we have any questions for the applicant, for staff?
Maybe she wants to tell them how that 20-day thing works. I don't know.
I think that might be better for staff, the ripcord, so to speak. You want to?
So under the State Land Use Development and Management Act, applicants have a right to due process by being heard by the Land Use Authority, and they can request that right, that hearing. Typically, that comes at the end of a long process when they feel they're being put off or delayed or being, per se, strung along. Rarely would we see someone make that request within the first 45 days of an application. That's just in the period where they're getting first review comments back from city departments. So it's more of just crossing the T's and dotting the I's than an element that will have any practical effect on the process. I've been here 6 years. I've never seen someone invoke that request. Bill has a longer tenure here and may have had that experience, but it is not common.
So that provision in state code would force the city to react when a developer invokes that provision, the ripcord provision. The city's attitude would be, if they tried to invoke that in the first 45 days, we would say you can't, this isn't ripe yet for you to even invoke that. It hasn't had a chance to even go to a neighborhood meeting. Like Moshios was saying, that's for situations where cities have delayed a decision for months and months and months or even years. The developer finally has to have a decision and he invokes that provision. Okay?
Thank you.
Would the city and the applicant have any problem adding vice chairs to the notification procedure?
I can answer on the organizational side in the council office. We've tried to include vice chairs in as many things as possible. I kind of default to that, and I believe community development also sends those notices to both chairs and vice chairs. Our hang up in the past has been our system. We're upgrading to new software packages across the city, and it's a somewhat slow and painful process. So some of those things may happen in the future. As far as a vice chair kind of overriding a chair's decision, I would say no. They're not elected to override anybody's decision. They're meant to fill in when the chair's not available. But I just wouldn't feel comfortable going down that path at this time. It's something we could examine for the future. And if there is a chair that's not actively participating, we can address that as well. We have some provisions for that. But yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable kind of having an end run there. But Mr. Pepperoni can probably address the notification system.
I agree with what you're saying. I think we can handle the notification situation procedurally without any change to the code. And the disagreement between a chair and vice chair, that's a substantive argument that should be discussed outside of this context.
Thank you.
I will validate as a former neighborhood vice chair that they do get almost all of the, if not all of the communication that the chairs get. So that the practice is there.
Any other questions for the applicant? Otherwise, discussion on the item? Okay. If not, if anybody's ready to take a stab.
I'm ready to make a motion, Mr. Chairman. I recommend that that we approve item 2 to the city council, and that we approve the text as presented in amendments to sections 14.02, 101, and 15.17.040 to clarify the neighborhood meeting requirements for the general plan amendments and zone changes.
Commissioner Howard, thank you. Commissioner Smith with the second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, once again, motion carries. And item number 2. Item number 3. This is a proposed code amendment to Chapter 14.41 that would make various changes to the allowances and requirements for home occupations. And we will turn the time over to Mr. Maxfield to present on this item.
Thank you. What I just passed out are slight revisions to the text which was shown in your staff report. They're comments really from the municipal council's attorney, and just show some of the changes he suggested. I don't think there's anything substantive in that. It's pretty just word orders and different phrasing for different things. The second handout really is Exhibit A, which incorporates those changes into what you saw in your staff report. As the notice states, there's certain things currently in the home occupation that council believes that could be amended to better address some of the concerns that have been raised in neighborhoods about home occupations. Principally, these changes, again, relate to some of the, I'm trying to read it, let me read it off the other script. This is kind of related, promotional meetings changes related to the number of customers, employees allowed with major home occupations, and the non-allowance for an accessory apartment and a major home occupation to be operated at the same time. As you saw in your staff report, the limitations were principally on major home occupations. Minor home occupations really are permitted without the business license. There have been recent changes to state code, state statutes that limit cities in requiring business licenses for two principal groups. One is youth under 18 operating businesses occasionally, lemonade stands, other things, that they may operate. But then other ones which are deemed to have no impact whatsoever in the neighborhood. And we've, in our ordinance for a long time, had some of those conditions spelled out. The home occupation has to meet. Our belief is that if you meet those, you should have no impact on the adjoining neighborhood. And so for that reason, when minor home occupations come in and can meet those conditions, they've just been permitted that way. The major ones were getting a little more intensive, and this was an effort really to scale some of that back to limit the number of outside employees or their hours. It does allow, in the ordinance now, additional employees depending on your lot size. It's 8,000 square feet for the first person, and then another person for every 30,000 square feet. This scales it back so you can never have more than two outside employees that work at your home. Differentiate, because we have two things that is talked about a little bit. One's an outside employee that works at your home that doesn't live at the home. The other is an off-site employee that a business at a home can have as many off-site employees as they want, as long as they don't come to the home. So just to make that clear. But I think a lot of it was the hours of operation also that limits it somewhat on that 5 to 9 o'clock time. And those are principally the major things it addresses. One other thing that was addressed because of a home occupation, actually more than one that have come in, that have had an accessory apartment and then have a major home occupation. There's a belief that that creates such a traffic conflict, or the number of spaces you have to have for parking both, the interaction between those two does create something which should not really, or wouldn't be considered common to a neighborhood. And so their desire was to not allow that, make sure it's clear that way. Any questions?
These proposed changes are thought to have been gleaned from experience the city has had with such businesses and things like that?
Correct. City staff has looked at even a broader amendment at some time in the future. We might propose to deal with a lot of other items, but these were the ones which the council felt were most immediate to address and had proposed these. We do on here have all of the changes if that's important. We can show those.
So the significant triggers for it being, that is a proposed home occupation being a major home occupation, outside employee, patrons coming to the, anything else?
And frequency as they come.
So for minor home occupations, can you still have patrons come?
Yes. But not outside employees.
And per Provo's program, then they fit into that exempt category that the state code references
Right.
relative to getting a license and that kind of a thing?
Right.
Okay. So really just clarification more so than substantively changing the approach to regulating.
Correct. One of the changes in there, if you notice the definitions, is what is an employee. Because many times, if the person is not paid, is he an employee or not? And this clarifies that a volunteer is also considered an employee. It's anybody that comes outside that does work there, whether they're paid or not. So in that case, it really does clarify an issue that had come up.
And that's the kind of thing. Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this tonight? Okay, seeing no one.
Me again. You're going to hear from me several times today. Okay, so
Can you state your name for us again?
yes, Martha Rasmussen, Mazer Vice Chair, and this was just a bit of wording I found a little bit confusing, so maybe it's not, and maybe it's worth changing. It says, a home occupation permit is not required for those home occupations that fully comply with the conditions listed in 14.41.040, except that Part 13 of that section says all home occupation permits shall be valid for 1 year and may be renewed annually, which kind of makes it sound like they have to have one even though it just said that they didn't. Maybe that's just me being confused. If that is an actual contradiction, I would suggest moving 13 over to the major home occupation since it would no longer apply to the minor. That's all. Otherwise, I approve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good scrutiny.
I'm Rachel Luke. I'm a resident of Rock Canyon neighborhood. I just want to give my support to the proposed amendments. I've been working with Dave Sewell with some other residents in our neighborhood, giving feedback about these amendments because we live across from a minor home occupation that has raised some issues for us. We believe that these amendments will clarify the intent of the current code, and especially that the use should be conducted so that the neighbors under normal conditions would not be aware of its existence. We believe that the more precise definitions contained in these proposed amendments will eliminate misunderstandings and ensure that home occupations are secondary to a residential character of a neighborhood. Making the city code more clear will also serve as a protection to Provo residents who run a home occupation, as they will be less likely to be misunderstood and unintentionally violate a city ordinance. Currently, the code specifies that in a minor home occupation, retail sales of products and services are allowed at the home with a maximum of 2 customers per hour. And while this may seem like a rather unambiguous statement that only 2 individuals should visit a home-based occupation per hour, my experience has shown that ambiguity does exist. The minor home occupation in our neighborhood is a recording studio that advertises itself as a performance and event venue. As a minor home occupation, this business is restricted to 2 customers at a time by city code. However, the business has interpreted the customer to indicate a single paying entity, such as a band, choir, or organization. Furthermore, non-paying individuals who come to our neighbor's business, such as visitors, spectators, and family members of performers, are not considered by the recording studio to be customers and are not counted towards the 2-customer limit. Thus, with the unclear definition of customer, we often see groups in excess of 50 people descending on our neighborhood. And this impacts us and our neighborhood negatively through parking, traffic, lack of privacy, noise, litter, and occasional property damage, as is to be expected with such large numbers. This is clearly not consistent with the intent of Provo City Code, and we've found trouble with enforcement as a result. And so we would ask that you consider all of the amendments carefully, and we hope that this will eliminate future misunderstandings in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the proposed language clearly defines a customer as a person, right? So it'd be 2.
It means an individual or a single representative of a group or organization who buys goods or services directly at the premise of a home occupation. So if you had a band go, you better only have 2 in the band.
Got it. Okay. Great. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. Pardon me?
Hey, my name's Adam Arnett. I don't know much about this one, but I've heard it talked about for a long time. How would this, I just got a question. How would this influence home daycares? If we're talking about the bans and such as being multiple individuals occupying, does that influence home daycares? We've got quite a few in my neighborhood. Just a question if you guys have answers. Thank you.
Staff, would you guys mind?
I don't know if I can really give you a good answer because home daycares have typically been exempted from that. Now, some cities, in comparing all the ordinances we've done through here, they emphasize that home daycare is really for residents in the neighborhood rather than a regional daycare center or something like that. And because of that, the assumption is a lot more walk, or you're going to have multiple children with one family and different things. So, there's so many situations you could look at as to how that compares, but it is something that we're trying to address in this larger review of the home ordinances. That's long been a question. Why is it that a home daycare can have, 2 sessions with up to 12 children and this, and how does that impact compare to, like this gentleman said, you have 4 people show up for a
But as
recording session.
Just as a matter of fact, as I understand it, it simply is a different license. It's titled differently.
Right, state
different
treats it
regulations.
differently, right.
Preschools, daycares, oftentimes are both treated that way. So similar in some ways, but from a regulatory perspective, different.
If you run a home daycare and you're licensed by the state, you can only have up to 6 children at a time, and that has to include your own children.
Yeah, I should say the other's for the major one where you can go up to 12 in a major home occupation. That's granted.
With an
but-
outside
but
employee.
That's exactly correct. On a minor, it's limited to 6.
Okay, anyone else? Item number 3. Okay, it's time for real. We'll close the public hearing. Any discussion on the proposal?
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the requested text amendment to section 1441 of the zoning ordinance as attached in Exhibit A.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Can I clarify, it might be as handed out in Exhibit A rather than that which was attached to the staff report?
As it exists in 8.1, 8.2, yeah, the most recently handed out version.
So second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? I think I have one last question relative to the actual language itself. And I might be confusing items here, but there's something that I read about promotional events that could be held up to 4 times a month, where you could have up to 12 people, I think.
Right. Currently, it does not limit the number in that promotional event. So this one adds the 12 as a limitation. The 4 a month is for major home occupations. Minor is still only 2. I don't know if that clarifies it.
It does.
Okay.
And honestly, that's the only thing. So it sounds like the regulation's becoming more strict, you're saying.
Correct.
Man, it still seems like that could certainly create an impact on a neighborhood. If you had 12 vehicles showing up, every week for something.
And again, that's hard because a lot of homes have people that come to their homes for
Super Bowl.
the
Absolutely,
Tupperware party.
yeah. Big families, right?
having-
Sunday dinner, stuff like that. That's-
And so, again, you're trying to, as closely as possible, resemble the ordinary occurrences in a neighborhood.
I think it makes perfect sense. That's the only thing that still, I guess, I had any hesitation with. But once again, motion and second. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's getting unanimous. Thank you. On to item number 4. John Hayes requests an amendment to section 1410-0206 to allow commercial uses to operate only in historic buildings in the residential single-family zone. Mr. Yost?
Thank you. Mr. Hayes submitted this application with the motivation of providing additional uses, viable uses for the future of a historic home for which he's been a good steward for a number of years. And in reviewing with him his application, he decided to propose a change to the residential single-family, or the R1 zones, to add a class of uses to that zone that are already permitted for homes within the residential conservation district. This proposal affects 18 properties that are currently listed on the Provo Landmarks Register and are within R1 zones. The amendment is to add the 6500 series professional services, excepting a couple more intensive medical uses, only in historic buildings as defined in this title, and that's defined as properties that are listed in the Provo Landmark Register. The location of the properties which this would impact at the moment as the Landmarks Register is currently constituted are shown on this map. They're primarily concentrated in the south end of the Joaquin neighborhood, with a few spread throughout the Mazer, the Franklin, and neighborhoods, as well as a couple to the east on Center Street. Staff has reviewed this and finds that the impact will be really no different than the impact within the RC area, which actually constitutes more of these central neighborhoods than the R16 does, especially on the east side of University. The proposal will provide additional opportunities for beneficial uses to historic properties. We have a number of historic homes, and significant ones that have been maintained well for decades because they were used as professional offices by owner occupants, and those properties were well maintained and have been are still around primarily because of that use at one time or another. So staff feels that it's an appropriate change to the R1 zone. It's limited in scope, and it will have a minimal impact and is still governed by all the requirements that govern commercial uses as far as parking and other impacts in those neighborhoods. After reviewing it, we recommend that you approve or forward a recommendation of approval to the council for this ordinance text amendment.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I don't know anything.
So, for example, if somebody wanted to convert one of the existing homes on Center Street into a professional office building relative to this site, what kinds of changes could they make? For example, where could you put parking and different things like that? How stringently is that regulated?
So all of the underlying requirements of the R1 zone would still be in play as far as lot coverage, location of parking. You still can't park in a front yard except on a driveway leading to required covered parking. You can only pave the percentage of your backyard that is permitted in the R1 zone. You can only pave one side yard to 100%. So basically all of the underlying provisions of the R1 zone are in effect. All this does is add that additional use category.
Will this require them to live in the home? Is it, or can they just convert the home?
No, the home can be used for these uses. It does not require owner occupancy or these uses to be an accessory use.
So even if they're living in a purely residential area right now, where it's zoned R1, they could move out of the home and turn it into a professional use?
Correct. Under this proposal, yes.
How difficult is it to have something designated a historical home?
Depends on how much you want it. If you want it, easy. If you don't, it's easy not to. It's a very straightforward process that involves the hardest part of it is developing the documentation, which requires a rather intensive level of research of the occupants of the home from its construction till now, biographical information on those, and a description, architectural description of the home, and a statement of its significance or the reasons why it should that it meets the criteria for being a landmark. It has to be older than 50 years. It has to be be significant in its architecture, design, or craftsmanship, or its relationship to people or events, significant on a local, state, or national level, and it has to retain its historic integrity, which means it has to essentially look like it, maintain its appearance. If it was your house 100 years ago, you should still be able to recognize it. The Planning Commission reviews those and then forwards recommendations to the City Council.
And is that a designation from the state of Utah or from the city?
No, that is a zoning designation by the state, and it is regulatory and restricts what can be done with the property, and any changes to the exterior of the building or to the site require a certificate of appropriateness from the Landmarks Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Is someone here tonight that would like to speak to this item? Thank you.
I'm the applicant. My name is John Hayes. I was raised in the Mazer Historic District, and I have owned a home at 485 East, 400 South for about 10 years. This home is on federal, state, and city historic registries. It was built by Niels Johnson. The cabin that you see in the photograph was built in 1870, and the brick home was built in 1876. For historical understanding, the President of the United States, when this home was built, was Ulysses S. Grant. And the President of the LDS Church, when this home was built, was Brigham Young. The first brick plant in Provo was built by Philander Colton in 1864. This home was built about 12 years after the very first brick plant in Provo was built. It has only been owned by 4 family owners. The Johnson family, the Hanson family, the Hadfield family, who Gary and Kathy Hadfield are historic preservationists. They live in Virginia. They spent multiple tens of thousands of dollars to restore this pioneer home. I have spent also multiple tens of thousands of dollars to preserve this home. My concern is historic preservation, and I feel that at this time, if this home needs a transfer of ownership, that it will be protected, be more likely to be protected if the owner could use it for a law office or certain upscale businesses where he would have an interest in making known its historic value to the city of Provo. For example, the law office of Worthen and Wilkinson in Provo's historic Johnson Hanson home. If you're interested in reading more about this, there's a Wikipedia page on this home. I feel that it is a historic relic that should be preserved for, it's been here for 148 years. It should be preserved for the next few hundred years. I think it's a valuable, important entity for the city, and I think it's good for our city to preserve landmarks like this. And I think this effort will, this amendment will allow its safe preservation, and I would recommend that we follow the planning staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Hayes, thank you. If you have another moment, do you have a tenant or somebody in mind?
No, sir. So the former owners, the Hadfields, bought the home while they had students at BYU. I bought the home when I had students at BYU. I've been reluctant to rent it out, and so there's no tenant in it now. I work occasionally in Utah County, and I'll stay in the home, but there's no tenant in it right now, but it will have a change of ownership.
Okay. How large is the home, like in terms of square footage approximately?
Oh, I wish I could tell you, but I guess about a little over 2,000 square feet.
If this change were to go the course and be approved and the property were to be converted from a residential to a professional office kind of a use, what changes to the site would you envision would be necessary to make that work?
This particular home is in exceptionally good condition. Foundation, roof.
And I just maybe to clarify what I'm asking, parking and different things like that. I assume that there's probably very
This home has
little-
quite a bit of parking, actually. It's on a corner, and it's got a pretty big driveway. I don't think that there would be much done for parking. I think that if I were to turn it into a law office, I would spend money on landscaping, mostly. And then the interior is extremely dated, and it would have to be, painted and updated inside. It's really not a very good home for a 2018 family. It's got a steep stairwell, and kind of a not-so-good bathroom upstairs. And so it was designed, many generations ago. And I don't know who wants to live in this home the way it is now, but it is a gorgeous home, and I doubt very many people driving by realize that it was built when U.S. Grant was President of the United States.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Is there anyone else here this evening that would like to speak to this item? Okay, if not, we will close the public hearing. And commission, any questions for staff, any discussion?
Mr. Yost, I have a couple of questions. What are most of the uses, professional uses that could go into this building? And what is the signage that would be allowed?
There's no signage permitted in the R1 zone.
Okay, so nothing even like hanging off of the porch?
No.
Okay. And then, like, law office was mentioned. What other types
So
of?
your finance, insurance, real estate, law, a title office. I should have brought the list. It basically encompasses all of those, as well as counseling, social work, family therapists. Basically, if anything that generally there are things that require a professional license from the state is what falls under this area.
Okay. But they wouldn't be able to advertise at all, put any sort of sign out to identify themselves?
No, there's no signage permitted in the residential single-family zone.
Okay. Would they be allowed to live there? Could you have an owner-occupied? We kind of talked about
A
this.
single-family house, any use in the area that's permitted in the zone can be conducted in the home, either individually or concurrently.
Okay. Thank you.
So literally mixed-use structure potentially.
Absolutely. Someone could live upstairs and have an office, or they could, conduct counseling in their den. which would generally be a home occupation, but in this case, they could, have some outside employees come in, have more customers. But otherwise, it would remain in all other characteristics and regulations with the residential single-family zone. And there are examples throughout the city also if you're interested in any of those.
Can you just list a couple?
So we have the Title Insurance Company located on the corner of 300 East and Center Street on the northwest corner. There is, actually, I'm not sure what it is now, but there was for a long time an advertising agency located in the Joseph Frisbee home on the corner of 200 North and 400 West in Provo. There is a law office on the corner, just across the street from Provo Bakery, on the northwest corner of that intersection. 1 block to the north is an architecture office.
The Smoot Home, doesn't it have some kind of film business?
No, I mean, he is a cinematographer, but off the top of my head, those are the ones that come to mind. The home across the street from the Frisbee home was once used as a law office. The Samuel Eggertson home on the corner of 5th South and 5th West, the northwest corner, was also used at one time as a professional office, but is converted back to a single-family residence.
All right. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
The proposal seems like a practical way to preserve historic homes and keep them viable. I think they add color to the community as long as they're not overbearing, and it doesn't sound like they would be. I think I concur with the staff's recommendation.
Okay. My reservations, I think, really are probably founded just in the unknown relative to what happens as these properties start to be used differently. And inherently, I think I'm more comfortable looking at use from more of a location perspective than, like an immediate site-specific, type of property or, particular condition of a property. I completely appreciate the applicant's desire to make sure that this particular property is continued to be cared for and maintained. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that, what he said is true about its age and, the things that literally have been witnessed in the home over the years. But I don't necessarily think that some of the sites that would be eligible for a non-residential use are all that well suited to it. And, with that, their likelihood for being converted to a non-residential use might be really, really low. Mm-hmm. But after just having the discussion about home occupations and some of the things that come with those, I'm hesitant to take a step into allowing for something that would at least potentially have a bigger impact than even that would on a neighborhood. And I certainly would hope that in this day and age, there's a demand for a home like this to be used residentially. I live in an old home that's not nearly this old, but I know that you don't have modern conveniences and bathrooms and things like that typical people want in this day and age. But at the same time, this isn't necessarily built the way that lots of people would want for a professional office use today as well. So
I think that one of the thoughts I had on that is the restrictions that, the remodeling restrictions you would have on this, the advertising restrictions you would have on this would in itself limit the wildness that you could get. I mean, your creativity with this is somewhat limited by the fact that this is a historical site. I think that's what I'm seeing here.
Right, and there are occasionally items that I feel really, really strongly about. This isn't one of them.
No, I know. Yeah.
I think there's maybe just a leap of faith that that I would need to take to support it that I'm not quite ready for. So that's my thought simply, but.
I would be interested in getting the addresses of these other properties and just driving by and, excuse me, seeing where they're located within their neighborhoods.
The 18 properties on the map, you mean the ones that would be affected under the proposed amendment? I have that spreadsheet I could send to you.
I think the fact that there wasn't any turnout for this particular thing says something about it. I mean, doesn't seem to be a big issue to the neighborhood. What do you think, Brian?
I racked my brain, which wasn't hard, but I racked my brain to figure out any way this could possibly bite the neighbors around them.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's enough throttles on it the occurrence, the frequency is going to be so low. And the usage is going to be something where it's not going to be a noise-making usage. The only thing that I can see being really an issue that could bite would be the parking, as you brought up. But it seems like the house still has to meet all the parking restrictions. And, unless somebody's, bringing in lots and lots of business. Title companies have 2, 3, 4 people in at the same time is about all. Some of the small law offices around the town are similar. I don't think they would turn into Thanksgiving or Super Bowl every day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm inclined to approve it because of just the throttles that are in place and the small number of places that this affects. I don't think we're going to see a flood of people running in to declare their homes as historic buildings. If we do, my bad.
Well, keep in mind the council gets to.
Yeah, but I think that could actually be a great thing. With that, I'm inclined to make a motion to recommend approval of item 4.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Actually,
Aye.
any discussion on the motion first? I assume we didn't, so again, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay. 2-2 vote, so next step goes to the council without a recommendation from the planning commission. Is that correct? And in light of that, we've already had some discussion that the council is going to be privy to relative to report from this meeting. Is there anybody that would like to add anything that might help the council understand?
I just think that there are so few of historical things, and I've been to places where everything's historical, and if they all are, then none of them are. And there's a balance there. I don't know. I think it's nice for these weren't historic sites when I was a kid, because my dad knew the occupants, or my grandparents did, and
It was still an historic site.
yeah, right. I think it adds color to the community.
I guess my thoughts right now are I'd like to drive around. It seems like there's a big cluster of them. Is that Joaquin?
Yeah, this is Center Street and 400.
Okay.
So this home is owned by 2 partners in a law firm that have spent an inordinate amount of money to turn it into their Provo retreat. It's a rental, owner-occupied, 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 owner-occupied.
Most of them will die anyway.
So yeah, that's Center Street, 9th. There's 2 over there. These are kind of the outliers, and the loose house across from Mazer Elementary is kind of an outlier too. But.
I guess I just would like to drive around and see them in the context of the neighborhood, and would like to, just first of all do that, but then also I have just had way too many unpleasant experiences in the city, and I realize that these are historical homes and they have throttles in place, as Mr. Smith said, to keep them from being remodeled in an adverse way that would detract from their historical nature. But I've seen too many times where people have gone in and done things that they shouldn't have and then ask for forgiveness later. And I would hate to see that happen with these homes. I'm not saying that that would happen, but I'm just skeptical that something like that could happen, and I would hate to see that happen with these beautiful homes and we've just got so few of them left. So those are my thoughts right now.
We've already had a motion, right? So
We have a motion and it did not carry, so do you have something to add, Mr. Burberry?
Yes, since the motion did not carry, perhaps the Planning Commission would continue the item to the next meeting where we may have more commissioners here to be able to vote on this, and it would give Ms. Swindon time to go out and visit the actual sites, and perhaps a different vote may result from that. The applicant is content to have his item delayed long enough for a continuance. He's not in that big of a hurry. So I'd like to ask you to consider that if you would.
Yeah, having voted in favor of it, I'm amenable to reopening it. And I guess, Robert's rules, we would make a motion to reopen it, but I'm happy to just make a motion and see if it floats to continue the item to the next Planning Commission meeting.
We'll entertain that. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Relative to discussion on the motion, just my thoughts, I think I would feel much more comfortable having this actual change go into effect if we had a tenant and a plan in front of us that showed maybe a little bit of detail relative to exactly what changes would happen and that sort of a thing. And I think short of getting to that point, I feel like we're a little bit premature in making this change that would not only impact this property but others. And that's just the last thing I guess I wanted to mention.
Just as a note, there are a lot of properties out there that are current businesses that just aren't on the historical register, I think.
I think that's certainly worth, and as staff suggested, it might make sense to go and look at some of those. As best as I can recall right now, though, it seems like they're located in areas that are very, very close to the kind of the historic central business district. Proximity, to other commercial uses and that sort of thing, I think really does matter a lot. And that's probably the case with a lot of the properties that would be eligible for this as well. So again, I don't want to make it sound like this is something that I have really, really strong feelings with one way or another, except that I do really appreciate the provisions that are in place already to protect properties like this one and property owners like Mr. Hayes that are willing to do what he's done to keep them in good working order and that sort of a thing. So motion and a second. I'm going to go and call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So that was to our next meeting.
Who was the second?
Was Commissioner Howard.
That would be July 25th.
Okay. Thank you to staff. On to item number 5. Tatiana Quinn requests an ordinance text amendment to redefine family to include 4 unrelated individuals. Once again, Mr. Yost.
Thank you. So as you're aware, for many years, discussion has taken place on the merits of the current statutes regulating occupancy in single-family homes and the definition of those different occupancy classes. Currently, in essence, the definition of single-family occupancy, and I want to make that clear because I know there's some concerns over defining what a family is. We're not defining what a family is here, and the statute doesn't do that. It's actually defining what constitutes family occupancy, which is just a term we use to describe a class of occupancy. We could call it nuclear conglomeration occupancy if we wanted, or bananas. So the word family just happens to be the word we used here. But family occupancy, as it's currently defined, is essentially either a family, as generally defined, with a head of household and relations, or 3 unrelated individuals. The proposal that has been brought to us by Ms. Quinn proposes to amend that definition to classify family occupancy as a family or 4 unrelated individuals. Her proposal... Back to the slideshow. Sorry, there we go. Her proposal comes to you with a number of alternate scenarios, primarily classified by their geographic extent. The first is to amend the definition to allow 4 unrelated individuals citywide. The second is to constrain that to PD zones in the Provo South and Foothill neighborhoods. And the third is to constrain that further to PD zones in the Provo South neighborhood. There are alternates to each one of these that extend the restriction further based on bedrooms in a single family residence, that if there are 3 bedrooms, that it would constrain the occupancy to 3. If there are 4 or more bedrooms, then it would allow the occupancy to be 4. So you kind of get a 1A, 2A, and a 3A out of each of these proposals. As far as neighborhood issues that we've received, we have, as notice went out in the case of a citywide application such as this to each neighborhood chair, we received requests for background information on the proposal related to its applicability, and those initial communicants didn't express a specific concern, and others that did express concerns didn't express further concern when they learned that staff would be recommending denial of the application. So I just spoiled the ending there. The key issues in this are that this constitutes a pretty substantive change to the way that we regulate occupancy in Provo. Primarily, staff concerns relate to the information and analysis provided with the proposal, and don't specifically address the central question of occupancy, because staff believes that there are areas in the city, and the city by policy believes that there are areas in the city that are suited to different classifications of occupancy. Areas such as the South Joaquin, the South Campus, or the North area of Joaquin that permit what we would call batching occupancy, which is 4 or more, 4 to 6 singles, unrelated individuals in a dwelling unit. And there may be other areas of the city specifically that are suitable for that occupancy. So as far as the question of the number of 3 to 4, we believe that it depends. So our ability to respond to that specific question of these occupancy numbers is really limited by the lack of a sufficiently comprehensive viewpoint in looking at this, and the quantitative analysis of the mandate for and the impacts of the proposal. It really makes it hard for us to analyze the merit of the proposal. A few, or basically 3 areas that we believe deserve some really deep study are the impacts of the proposed amendment within our currently adopted zoning ordinance. Our ordinance was written on the basis of occupancy by unrelated individuals being generally limited to 3. This is manifest in multiple ways throughout the code, such as parking requirements, lot coverage limits, density regulations, and others. The second is the potential physical impacts of increased occupancy, including parking demand, traffic generation, and population density. And the third is the impacts to housing supply and demand. We feel that an in-depth housing market segmentation study could provide the necessary data to analyze supply and demand and to develop strategies to address the identified issues. That kind of data could create an objective mandate for an amendment to occupancy limits as an effective implementation measure. And staff would be much more able to analyze the ability or the potential of such a proposal to address concerns that were identified through that housing study if we had all of that data to identify potential issues and determine the efficacy of the proposal in solving those issues or improving those issues. The catch here is that the study of these subject areas really fall outside of what we can expect from a private applicant and what they can reasonably conduct. Staff believes that such studies can and should be conducted by the city to facilitate an objective and an effective planning process. And we try to go out and get data and identify issues and then develop data-driven solutions to those issues. So additionally, we contend that the current increases in housing prices, both in the for sale and rental markets, and the continued shortage of moderate income housing constitute a really clear mandate to undertake these type of studies. So through our analysis, that's what those are our findings. And there are additional staff analysis presented in your Planning Commission staff report related to Code Section 1402020, which has the specific guidelines for consideration of ordinance text amendment. And I can address any questions related specifically to those if you have any. Otherwise, I would leave you with staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of denial to the City Council with the caveat that the applicant has a presentation that she would like to present, and will most likely request that you continue the item for further discussion, both for the applicant to potentially develop greater information or work through other avenues, and also one of her key desires is to receive feedback and sentiment from the commission as to which of the proposals that have been presented may be either viewed positively or seen as a viable text amendment moving forward to the council. So, thank you.
Mr. Yost, thank you. Do we have any questions for staff?
I do have one. What is staff's thoughts to continuing this if that comes up and is asked for?
Absolutely fine with that, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
We just wanted to make our position
Sure.
on the proposal clear, but we absolutely welcome further discussion.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, the applicant and a presentation. Do you want to launch into that, or what's the best way to, yeah. Mr. Yost mentioned you might have a presentation that you wanted to make.
I do.
Okay. We're all set. Great. Thank you. And you are?
Hi, yes, I'm Tatiana Quinn, and I am a resident of Southeast Provo, specifically Provo South. And this proposal was brought to you in a matter of 4 days. Enough funds were raised by mostly the vast majority residents of Provost South neighborhood. Oh, thank you, my clicker. I received help definitely in this presentation, and I will try to go through it as quickly as possible so as to not use more time than is needed. That being said, it is a dense topic, so I will try my best. Really what we're hoping to do is to hold a discussion with you, and as Mr. Yost clarified, we would be asking that we continue this discussion. We would absolutely love your feedback regarding this proposal. Let's narrow that down a little bit. Oh, if I can figure out technology, like I said, someone helped me with the slideshow. Okay. The problem. There is a housing shortage in Provo. That's in general. There's a 3.6 vacancy rate compared to the national 7.6 rate. No housing has been designed for single non-students. A lot of times people will respond that a certain area has been designed for families, and the reality is there hasn't been anything designed for single non-students. Most non-students, additionally, do not want to live like students, as in apartments, just like many family members, married couples do not want to live in apartments. Some do out of all of those demographics. Strong market demand among YSPs, standing for Young Single Professionals, for traditional housing, such as single-family detached and townhomes. The general plan of Provo does include this, a notion that every family or individual needs a place to live. So even though some places haven't been designed for certain people, those certain people still do need a place to live. YSPs have found a home in certain areas, such as Southeast Provo, which are designed well for singles. In Southeast Provo, we see HOAs, we see larger units. There are a lot of townhomes and condos. Yes?
YSP, young single person?
Yes, young single professionals.
Thank
It's kind of a political term, but we don't have to use it.
Want to get it right.
Okay.
Being an old professional person.
Yeah. It's great. They formed a community. They already attract, and they always will attract, young single professionals. They also attract families. They attract a mix. Well, when I'm talking about Southeast Provo, it attracts a mix, and people, for the large part of that, appreciate the diversity. These areas meet the needs of the residents, but the occupancy laws were never tailored to the needs of this community. Proposed solutions. In general, an overview is that there are different ways we could look at addressing this problem. We could look at we could narrow it down by area. Are we talking citywide? Are we talking specific areas? We could look at housing size, such as square foot. We could look at number of bedrooms. We could look at the number of occupants. What would be the appropriate number? And as Mr. Yost explained, we do have a variety that we have prepared as suggestions. You might know of other areas in town that could use a change like this. For example, if you could, Molly, if you could click on the middle on the right-hand side, the 3 to 4 in Provost. We know that in Provost South, there are a few PD zones, and you can see on the map in the bottom right-hand corner where those stars are. We're talking just about some PD zones. Pioneer, planned unit development, Deer Haven, Pioneer 2. Slate Canyon Drive is in between a lot of these planned unit developments, just a certain section of it. Canyon Meadow, Aspen Summit, Alpine Brook. And if you want to click on just one of those, we can show you just an example of some pictures, and we have more for each of those areas if you want to go back. So we're mostly looking at attached townhomes and condos in that particular slide, and these PD zones also do include some detached homes and some, mostly though, attached townhomes. Yeah, if you want to. So another place that we have identified as a strong draw for young single professionals, but it's kind of a different area. It also has some BYU student housing, whereas Southeast Provo is not BYU student housing approved. We're just looking at 2 zones. There's about 4 zones in that Foothills neighborhood that are PD, but we're just looking at 2 of them. That's Arlington Place townhomes, Belmont condos, and Highland Park townhomes. And I'd love to dive into that more for later if you have more questions about those areas. But first, probably, and if you could pick press the return button. First, a pressing question is why? And so, why 4 in these areas? Or another option that I didn't really talk about is, a private room type of scenario where if it's 3 bedrooms or less. 3 or less people. If it's 4 bedrooms or more, 4 or more people. There is a high demand for young single professional housing in these particular areas, and some of these next points will be general, and some of them will be neighborhood specified. Social and familial structure. A lot of people feel like 4 is more of a familial and social structure that is a support system. Sometimes you'll have a situation where 2 people knew each other or are siblings or are cousins, and they tend to go and do things a lot together, and that kind of leaves one person as the odd man out. When there's 4, there's a more likelihood that, there's a stronger likelihood that everyone will kind of have a buddy, so to speak, which everyone wants. Everyone wants a family, and this particular neighborhood is pretty unique in a lot of ways. In Southeast Provo, we're talking very quiet and well-mannered and very civically minded people. We're talking people that tend to go to bed at 10:30 and people that are trying to get married and they're not living this bachelor lifestyle, so to speak. A lot of people are, that's in their foresight, to be honest. 4 is a common and reasonable occupancy number, and there are not health, safety, or welfare challenges. And that's where we will get into that a little bit more. And then some common misconceptions. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some things that we've heard. Singles don't take care of their property. Singles and investors are pricing out families. Singles stay up late and make noise. There's a parking problem in that neighborhood. Singles will take over my neighborhood. Our LDS family wards are suffering. I won't dive into all of these, but I'm glad to. I'm glad to take your feedback as to if you would be willing to continue it, as to what you would like us to further study or work with Planning Commission to further study. But here are some responses. The reality is that many singles are homeowners, that singles are not raising home prices, and I feel like that data that we did gather data and we prepared a 13-page report. We just didn't get it to the planner in time for him to include an evaluation of that report in his evaluation. But if you could click on that, it's a pretty simple demonstration. We looked at the price increase per year from 2015 to 17 in all of Provo, and we're looking at about 9.2%. So house prices are raising in general. As far as the difference between Southeast Provo, we looked at the Provo School District and the Spring Creek School District, and then also just specifically the planned unit developments in Southeast Provo. We saw that there was hardly any change in the increase rate. As far as the actual market price, we're actually looking at all things considered equal, square footage and everything. In Southeast Provo, we're looking a few percentage points cheaper. And same thing in the planned unit development units. So as far as any contention that investors are driving families out, this clearly shows that even if an investor is bidding his or her highest, a family is still given an opportunity at a slightly cheaper opportunity than they would in Provo in general. I did not explain that well, I apologize, but if you want to click the return button, hopefully that makes sense. Homes are well taken care of. Most homes in the PD zones in Southeast Provo are in HOAs that provide yard care. And then there is no evidence to show that singles are the cause for any decreases in enrollment at local schools. Provost Elementary School has raised recently, and we have seen a decline in Spring Creek, but I'll just skip over that for now, because as far as I understand, that's kind of been talked about already and resolved. But of course, if you want us to go into that further, we can. And then another reality is that young single professionals want to obey the law, hence bringing this proposal. If the legal occupancy limit is set at 4, any investor buying homes to pack people in, putting 7 people in or whatever it may be, that's still violating the law. That's still not in line with the people bringing this proposal. We're not on the same team as investors doing that. And in fact, it would be easier to enforce on them if it was raised to 4, because that's opening up the possibility of a lot of people that there are a lot of people in this neighborhood that do get bugged by people doing that, but they're not going to report it because they themselves are technically living out of occupancy laws. There'll be more people that are living within occupancy laws, and sorry, I don't think I clarified this earlier, but a rule of 4, especially with the caveat of 3, if there are 3 less bedrooms in this area that we talked about in Southeast Provo, that is setting the status quo. That's not increasing numbers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. There's not an inexhaustible supply of singles. This comment, so singles won't elect bachelorhood due to increased housing options. In reality, I think that a lot of people have this fear that if occupancy limits are raised, that they will automatically be, every unit will automatically be filled up in that area where it's raised with 4 occupants. And for various reasons, that's not going to happen as far as sharing rooms. It's like 90-something% of the area wants the private room, and they do that. Second of all, there's not an inexhaustible supply. There's not going to all of a sudden be a ton of singles that were not there before. We're talking about there's going to be a similar demand. As the housing demand in general increases, as population increases in general, so will singles, of course, but the percentage is not going to just suddenly increase a bunch. And it's not like there's the surrounding towns are that people don't have options in the surrounding towns either. In fact, they're doing a lot of developments that are, welcoming, and we would love to evaluate that more, though. I think Mr. Yost talked about that. That's something that we could delve into more data on. Parking in Southeast Provo meets residents' needs. If you could click on that data point. We also did a 22-page study of parking, and this, again, we didn't provide it in time simply. And we evaluated the Southeast area, and specifically the streets in the area where these PD zones are. You can see on the right a graph of the red indicates possible available spots besides private spots, or privately owned. And then the blue markings represent available spots. In total in this area, there were 814 existent spots, and late at night, this graph represents around midnight and evaluation. That's when this neighborhood is definitely in bed. And there were 273 spots open. That's a whole third. What it came to is, on average, from the nearest existent spot to the spot where there actually wasn't availability, the average was 12 feet. So if during the day, if during a time when there is, every single existent spot is available compared to the peak time when parking is the tightest, it's a difference of a 12-feet walk. If people were walking several blocks, for example, that could be a safety concern, but we're just not seeing that in this area. A lot of people, let me back up. People are not complaining about parking in this area in general. A lot of the times what we're hearing in the political discussions are complaints from people that don't live in this neighborhood. We do hear some complaints from some Lake Canyon Drive residents, but from what I understand, those complaints are that they have to park 2 or 3 houses away on the street rather than in front of their house. For it to be proclaimed so loudly that there's a parking problem, we're saying we're looking and we're gathering data, and we're happy to gather more data. There's just not. If you could return that. So if you can press return. Yeah, we'll just go back to the main page. So at this point, I'm wondering if you would like to delve into looking at a closer look at any of these areas, or, yeah.
May I ask questions, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. First of all, you've used the term "we" a lot, and maybe I'm slow on the uptake. Are you hired by a group of people? Are you representing a group of people? What's going on here?
Gotcha. Yeah, not hired. I work as an attorney in this valley, but would never ever have to do this in my professional capacity. This is me as a tenant, me as a resident of Southeast Provo, along with a lot of other residents of Southeast Provo. We're the ones that funded the fee that it would take to submit this proposal.
And you're proposing to change the figure from 3 to 4. Why not 50? Why not 10? Why 4?
Right. And there are, plenty of people that it's hard to grasp why there are limits in general, and there's a whole history of that, we could look at. And so really, for a couple of reasons, for those who would like to see 5 for the 5-bedroom units, the reality is that we know that in the political climate right now, there's not political capital at all for that. But more importantly, a lot of people in this area think that 4 is the most reasonable number, and that is what would establish the status quo. And the people that are living in 3-bedroom houses, most do not want to go up to 4, but there are several units in the area that do have 4 bedrooms. There are a few that have 5, but...
So is a thought that a group of 4 unrelated people would get together and buy a house and move into that house, is that what we're talking about here?
There is some, like I mentioned at one point, there are a lot of owner occupants amongst the singles. There are some that cannot quite afford that, and they are grateful for the chance to rent. But yeah, groups of 4, often that feels like a good familial structure. When you get to 5, there are some issues. A lot of people don't like living 5. Some people are okay with it. Every person is different, but as far as a normal unit with 1 refrigerator, with your normal amenities, and with 4 bedrooms, 4 just makes the most sense.
I'm worried about unforeseen ramifications. Have you done any studies about? You presented a case here. I guess we'll hear what other people have to say. But it's I think that's the worry in the room, at least to me, is you start changing the definition from a family, and it'll have this ripple effect through the code.
Oh, as in other areas adopting it as well?
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would respond to that with, it would be important to look at the data, and that's why I have not emphasized the 4 citywide proposal, and I understand that is a lot of what the response was in the recommendation. We don't have the capacity to evaluate all of that data, and it's more of looking at areas where there is a demand. In this particular area, this is anecdotal, but from what I have understood, when an owner does list a unit for rent, 9 out of 10 times it'll be a group of single people as opposed to a family. And out of the families that are interested, about 4 out of 5 lose interest when they learn there's not a yard. So here we're looking at an area with a certain type of housing type that just generally, it does attract both, usually not long-term, usually not people, sometimes, but there's not a lot of yard space as far as, and their houses are close to roads. It's not the safest place for children. And so we're looking at the draw. In general, it's not going to be the same way in all of Provo. Definitely not.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
My only question is, I don't know if you were finished or not. It sounded like you could keep going, and I wanted to, as much as I wanted to allow, if you had 10 more slides, then allow 10 more slides, but it sounds like, speaking for myself, I'm amenable to continuing this. If there's more investigation, more study to do, and I would love to see that presentation on paper in front of us so we can research it and look at it for the weeks leading into the next time we hear this, if that's what happens. And I just don't want to have you spend the next half hour of your life where there's more work to be done on this, and then come back and we can really research it and study it. But I did have the same question as to, usually we see somebody that's got a real dog in the fight, so to speak. And, maybe I should change the terminology, looking at everybody out in the audience. Can we ask for a raise of hands of somebody who's in this scenario where they wish that they could be the 4th person in an apartment right now? So there's a few, yeah. Okay, so the majority of the audience, okay. All right, good. That's good to know. So, yeah, questions I had. So, yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anything else? Just relative to what you'd like the commission to do tonight. The staff's made a recommendation to not approve just the concept of allowing 4 individuals. It was mentioned that you might request that this be continued. I don't want to put words in your mouth or lead you in any particular
correct.
direction, but what would you like us to do?
Yes, I would ask that we continue this. I would also ask for your feedback so that we would know, and sorry, I keep saying we, that is kind of a habit. It is, I guess, technically my proposal, that I would know, however you want to say it, what to do going forward. As far as what kind of data you are looking for, what kind of areas you are more interested in receiving data for.
I think that's a good plan. I would just like to say, because we hear this a lot about affordable housing come before this body, and I think the city's well aware of it. Certainly we are well aware of it, and quite recently we approved a large apartment that, what is it, YSPs? I think it would be A-OK for YSPs. I think it's one of those things that we're trying to address the problem, is what I'm telling you. This may be a component of a future discussion for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily have much feedback. Conceptually, I don't have concerns with going from 3 to 4. For me, it's really just a question of density, and the community's been very, very liberal with approving quite a bit of density in certain parts of the city. 4 persons in a home. Do we know what the average household size in Provo is? Is it 3.24?
3.24.
I mean, we're not really rocking the boat a lot relative to what the average household size would be anyway with that. And I will say this, just relative to some things that we've heard when we've talked about some other projects, that when they come to us talking about kind of the contemporary apartment model, it seems like they're consistently being built for a particular demographic, and it seems like the exact demographic
that's what
you're
I mean.
representing tonight. And to that end, I think Provo's been extremely accommodating relative to providing housing options, certainly compared with surrounding communities in the county. And, also, I guess, this is maybe more commentary than a feedback or a question or anything, but we talk a lot about housing shortages, and I don't really view things such that Provo has a housing supply issue. It's something that impacts every dwelling and every person all along the Wasatch Front, and sometimes I feel like Provo ends up getting a lot of press, or we hear a lot about the need for Provo to solve housing problems when it's a regional thing. It's something that goes far beyond anything that can be dealt with just on a local Provo city kind of a level. But again, I think the devil for me probably is in the details of how this might work, how it might be regulated. I'm certainly concerned about doing anything that's going to require more resources on the part of the city to enforce something or regulate it. But I don't see it inherently as a really big change. And for whatever this is worth, I'd probably be most comfortable if it were a citywide change than to try to limit it to any particular part of the community. I understand that might make it more of an uphill battle to get something approved, but it seems like that's the most logical way to do it from my perspective.
Gotcha. If I may respond to, so yeah, a couple of things. You mentioned I did need to clarify something. Those areas that have been approved for development in the future that might appeal to young single professionals, or at least that was the goal. That's a whole nother discussion, whether, if they're apartments or what kind of housing type they are, because that will play into whether it does attract young single professionals. A lot of what this proposal is about is letting people stay where they are, and having an option currently. Those developments will still take time, and right now, there's this community right here, and with current legislative changes, they're facing an option of, well, I feel unwelcome, I'm just going to leave Provo, and a lot of people are doing that right now. And then there's also the option that a lot of people are planning to take on moving into more units, which does create a more difficult housing supply issue for everyone. So just to clarify that, yeah. And then as far as the, you also mentioned, what was the last thing that you mentioned? Citywide.
Right.
Gotcha. Right. I do not remember what I was going to say to that, so never mind.
I had another question. I don't know that it's even fair to ask. It's probably anecdotal. You can't speak to every situation or maybe even the majority. I'm curious, are we typically talking about dwellings that are in some way owner occupied, or is it an absentee landlord that has a home?
Yeah.
And they advertise it and it gets rented then by 4 or 3 unrelated people and that kind of a thing? Is there any propensity one way or another relative to whether, for example, if we change this to 4, it would make it easier for somebody to purchase a property and to live there and to achieve that home ownership? Any thoughts about that?
Sure, yeah. There's a current mix amongst singles in this area. Some are owner occupied and a good portion are renting. As far as investors who would want to or would feel like they have more of an opportunity to invest and to do that to buy homes and rent them out to people. For one thing, if they try to do that and they flood and they try to do that in large numbers, it's just not going to work if they're trying to just rent to singles right now. Like I was saying at an earlier time, there's not an inexhaustible demand. That being said, there are also families that are interested in renting, and this is something that we'd want to look into more, I imagine, is the prices for renting to families versus renting to singles. And there's anecdotes galore, but I know that there is a way to get some solidified data on this. The reliable sources that I've heard, we're looking at if it's a 4-bedroom unit, then at least in certain parts of these PUDs that we talked about, the rental price is about the same. It's about $1,600 for families and then $1,600 for singles, and that's going to be, you're going to hear a lot of anecdotes about the extremes about investors that do buy and they rent to 6 or 7, they pack people in and they charge them an arm and a leg, each of them. As far as that's, like I said before, that we're not on the same team with that kind of behavior, and it's an issue. We want to help with that issue, and honestly, it's not happening a ton in this area. I think it's more areas and other people in other neighborhoods that talk about that a lot. In this particular neighborhood, it is something that we all want to continue working together on to alleviate.
Thank you.
One of the data points that I would love to see is, and I was just trying to look it up, other cities around the country that's similar to Provo, in size and demographic and college towns and that kind of thing, and what are they doing? I don't love reinventing the wheel. We're not trying to do that, but having data that proves out other areas that are very similar to Provo, Provo-Orem, makes a lot of sense to look at that and see what they're doing also. Not that we have to follow, but it's just good data to have. So.
Right, yeah. And in my preliminary study of that, I've seen that most cities in the states are looking at 4 or more, or no limit. We got 4, 5, 6, 7, and no limit, and I think even 8, and a few that are less than 4, very small percentage. But that is very well noted, and definitely I think that's something we can look at.
So back to Commissioner Smith's question a little while ago. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with us before we?
I feel
dove in
like
that
I should
direction,
say
or-
yes. I mean, I could show you, really the things that I haven't shown you are maps that are a closer look at some of these areas. Just kind of an explanation of what each of these options presented so far means, not the language of the actual amendment text, but a summary of what it means. So if people do have questions, I will be happy to point out where that can be, shown. I feel like actually that would be good to, okay, it's at the end. It's just a closer look, and it's something that I made, and it's really poor quality, but it's just to show what exact PD zones I have proposed today. Going through the proposal again. It's at the very end. Oh yeah, if you want to, it's like the last 5 slides, but just 2 of those specific. So after that, okay, so there's some pictures, but then yeah, after that, okay. So for those wondering about what areas and what streets are we talking about, we explained the planned unit developments, and we explained it earlier, but that helps. And then there's also the one, just another area that we had identified, and that was those 2 PD zones of foothills. And those are surrounded by residential areas where, again, they might be impacted if the status quo is not kept in those particular 2 PD zones, which are solely townhomes and condos. And from what I understand, the parking is contained there. But you will notice I haven't presented a lot of data on this particular point. It's something that, could be further looked into. I just don't live there. I don't know a lot about it. And there are some that live there that would be willing to help with that as well. But really, like I mentioned at the beginning, this proposal is primarily brought from people that live in the Provost South neighborhood.
From the change amendment, the citywide amendment, the change on parking and renting and all that, is that driving your issue?
Oh, the rental disclosure law? Yes, it is well, there's a whole history there. There have been some other attempts to change the occupancy laws in, I don't know about this area, but in the Southeast Provo area. And they didn't get far because they were met with extreme opposition. There have been other proposed developments in other neighborhoods and in our own neighborhood. The developments got shot down by neighbors because they believed it would attract certain type of people, from what I understand, and that I don't know all the details on that. So yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
Anything else for us?
Nope, I would just again ask that you be willing to consider continuing this, and please feel free to, I'll sit nearby if you have any more questions for me after comments or during them, I'd be happy to address.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is where I'll likely prove my lack of tact, but for staff, do we have any normal mode of operations for when we know an applicant wants to continue an item and how we proceed? I assume there are a few people here that would like to speak to this tonight. And it's very possible that when the commission considers this, we'll have a number of other commissioners here that won't benefit from anything that anybody says tonight. Some of us might not be here when this is heard again. So frankly, I think we're probably best to limit any comment that we take tonight until we're ready actually to have an opportunity to look at whatever's presented when this is back before the commission for consideration. I'm saying this on the assumption that we will act to continue this tonight. Does anybody see anything differently? And I don't mean to speak for the commission. Any thoughts relative to continuing the public hearing to a future date or taking public comments tonight?
My only thought is, I am in favor of continuing this and would probably make that motion to do so. But I want to value the citizens' time, and I would welcome maybe a 10-minute period where we hear a couple of pros and a couple of cons, and once we start hearing the same thing over again, we kind of halt it there, just so we kind of get the general feel of some folks that are out here.
Provides balance.
If the commission wouldn't mind, I'd be amenable to that.
Okay. We're not gonna, I really appreciate that idea. And it's always great to see people that care enough to come to these kinds of meetings. And we're not gonna keep the clock really closely, but I just ask, that we maybe hold our peace until we have more information. Maybe we have a more refined, specific proposal ready to be considered. And with that being said, if anybody really wants to speak tonight, we'll go ahead and just start to go down that list and see where we get.
Can you address how that affects council
Is the neighborhood chair?
Thank you. So again, assuming that we act tonight to continue this, I believe we likely will not continue it to any specific date. So it would be re-advertised for a public hearing with the Planning Commission at some future date. Might be in a month, might be two. Staff see it differently. Do you expect that we'll have a date in mind, or?
I think that's probably wisest in that your next meeting is the day after Pioneer Day, and I'm not sure we'll have a quorum that night. So although the last item you continued to a date specific, your next meeting, I told the applicant in the hallway that may not work in reality. So I think you're probably right, especially when we're trying to get input from the applicant and staff needs a chance to analyze that before we send it to you. I would also just encourage members of the public that, in my opinion and in my experience, your comments can be much more thoroughly weighed by the Planning Commission if you'll email them into us and let us put them together and send them out to the Planning Commission so they can read that in advance of a meeting. It's hard to sit up here on the dais and listen to the input and make a decision that night. It's much more helpful if you can get that information ahead of time and read it and think about it. It's just much more productive. So I would just encourage you to do that.
I'm sorry, but along with that, then it's going to be on the council's.
No, we just advertise them concurrently in order to speed up the process. Until the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, it will not go to council. So on the council agenda, it will show as continued because they haven't received a recommendation from Planning Commission yet.
So again, it'd be re-advertised and so forth for some future meeting. I'd go as far as to maybe ask staff to consider, if we ever start meetings early, like maybe forego a work session and start early if we expect that there's going to be considerable interest in speaking and that sort of a thing. And that being said, in the spirit of hearing people that really want to be heard tonight, we'd love to hear from a few people.
My name is David Wright. I'm chair of Rock Canyon, neighborhood chair of Rock Canyon. And I think you need to consider this very carefully. I think she was correct at the very beginning when she said one size does not fit all. To do this throughout the city would be somewhat disturbing. Also, I think there's some things that without data you can easily understand. If you can rent a house to 3 people or to 4 people, then it makes a difference on the value of the house. If you can rent it to 4 people, it'll be more competitive for a single family to buy the house. I think that's pretty clear. The other thing is there are neighborhood schools that have been closed because of lack of children in the neighborhood. We no longer have Mazer Elementary or Joaquin Elementary. Over the years, those neighborhoods deteriorated and lost the family friendly neighborhood, and those schools were closed. And I think that's unfortunate. Parking, there might be parking around, but it seems evident to me that a house should be able to provide parking for the occupants. Anything that goes beyond that is a problem. I think that's enough for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Marion Monahan, Edgemont Neighborhood Chair. As soon as I see something that says citywide, then the flag goes up and I check into it. I'd like to tell you some of my past experience. Most of my complaints in my neighborhood are from over occupancy. The houses that rent to 3, which they're allowed to rent to now, always seem to morph into 5 and 6. And that causes all kinds of extra noise, traffic, sort of disrupts the neighborhood. If you make it 4, it's going to morph into even more. And so it's the neighborhood chair is always chasing around because the neighbors are complaining about this, and this is not fair to either the neighborhood or to the chair. I do feel that if you make this family of 4, that it does encourage investors to buy homes and just discourages or takes away the opportunity of families. They obviously do not have the income that 3 or 4 young professionals have. That's just the way it is. So please consider that it's not going to stay at the number that you think, regardless of what the rule are, that you now have to get the signatures and have everybody sign, because I've seen it over and over and over. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christina Kieran. I live down in Southeast Provo. I moved there about a year ago when I finished being a student, because I didn't want to be a student anymore. I didn't want to live in student housing anymore, and I had wanted to live in this neighborhood, and it's been just such a great experience living in that neighborhood. It's a community, it's family. I have the hardest time falling asleep at night, and it's dead silent in that neighborhood. Everyone goes to bed early. I love it. And I would just, I would recommend coming down and checking it out. And you're going to hear a lot of things, but come drive around our neighborhood and come talk to the people on the streets, because we love living here. We love living in Provo. We love living in that area. And it really, I can't emphasize how much it feels like a community down in that neighborhood. And I would just also say that we are going to work hard to get data to you, and data is really important to this process. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Ben Tran, and so actually on the slide it says like some of us like don't want to live in the student housing, but actually like for some of us we cannot like live in the student housing, because it's like for the student housing they have like the BYU approved, and also BYU approved like you need to be BYU student or less than 30, and then like some of us like more than 30 and or like not a BYU student anymore. I'm not a BYU student anymore, so it's impossible for me to find a house outside that area. There's like a few houses like here and there in Old Mill, which is like not Provo, but like they also have like some of the certain rules that's like it's like less than 30 years old or something like that. So I think that's like maybe you should consider it's like some of the place that's like maybe to kind of like there's no like housing for any student that's like graduate from BYU and working. Most of the places like apartment or something like that they mention, and everyone is mentioned in here, is actually for BYU housing, and that's for BYU housing it needs to be like under 30 years old or go to school. And also like another thing is like some of the house in the Pioneer area, like my house right now, there's like one empty room that's like cannot be used. Actually it can be two empty rooms, but like one particular one is like building over there, there's one tenant over there, but he needs to move out. So that's like right now like one empty room. And so like would you maybe consider about the situation that's like for like student that like not BYU student anymore, we still have the home to stay in here. So it's like in case that's like we come back to study, we don't need to like go home on the way to Texas, because we cannot have the house in here and then like come back again in the next year or something. So that is something that's like you should consider for us. That's going to be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So here's what I understand that we've heard so far. We've heard that enforcing the regulation would be an issue. So if we go from 3 to 4, or maybe really going from 5 to 7 or something like that as a concern. We've heard that property values potentially are a concern, because ultimately we'd be discouraging home ownership as investors are going to be more competitive, more able to outbid families that might want to purchase a property and again have that property be occupied by its owner. We've heard that impact on schools would be adverse, and that's a concern. We've heard that parking, or lack of parking, would be a concern. We've heard there's a need for additional housing for people that aren't students. And we've heard that the impact's really not adverse of having unrelated people living in the same dwelling, in the same neighborhood. So from that vein, if you can give us a comment in a minute or two, we'll take it, but then we're going to close it.
I can. My name is Michael Morris. I lived 28 years on Slate Canyon Drive up in Provo, Southeast. Safety has not been mentioned. I have children, and a lot of people that live nearby me have children. And because of the increased density of the homes north of me, and the fact that they have supposedly only 2 parking spots to the unit, and yet they're renting to 3 and 4 people, there are an immense number of cars that come flying down my street, and they don't go at 25 miles per hour. I sat out there the other morning, and I wish that the police would come hang out on my street, because you could pull them all over.
So traffic volume and traffic speed.
Yes.
Density, yep.
And it's very dangerous. And one of the pleas for not accepting this change was that it was justified by being that it was a safe thing, moving from 3 to 4. That's not true.
Okay. I appreciate what Mr. Pepperoni said a minute ago. I think by far the most effective way to provide comments that can be really deliberated and considered and worked on is to submit those. This is where we get to invite them to get in touch with you, right? What's the most? Okay. So Josh Yost, I think, would be the best person to contact. Tell you what, we've got to, I think, just functionally move on. If you have anything to mention that hasn't been considered already.
I'm just going to say that he mentioned in the staff report that some of these data points are things that a private citizen who's proposing this might not be able to collect and might offer city. I would just be curious, maybe as just to what resources would be available there, what the city would be willing to help with. Because this is such a polarizing issue, a big issue. Big issue. How big it is something that we should be looking at extremely.
Thank you. I think that's very worth bringing up. I appreciate that.
So my intent in putting that in the staff report was, I guess it all comes out now, but a somewhat oblique way to provide the Planning Commission with a reason to include in a recommendation, or from your perspective as the commission to recommend or provide advice to the council that you feel that undertaking those type of studies is important, that there's a mandate to do that now, and providing that encouragement to the council and administration that you feel that those are priorities. So that would be the reason that one reason that I included that statement, that they're better, that they're suited to the scope and capabilities of the city.
Thank you. So with that, again, we will re-advertise before this is considered again in this forum, in the Planning Commission setting. And again, for whatever it's worth, I think we might want to consider starting earlier, make sure we have adequate time. And I'd also say this, I think collectively everybody's most effective if, maybe there are a couple of people that are designated to speak specifically to specific topics, so that we can avoid redundancy and things like that, that I think sometimes it really gets us off track relative to what the real issues are and the things that we need to focus on. So for whatever that's worth, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing for tonight, and I'm ready to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to continue item number 5.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion there? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Appreciate everybody coming tonight. Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Do we have a second?
Aye.
Second.
So moved. Thank you.